Pearl lives an unfulfilling life on her parents' farm when all she wants is to be a dancer and travel the world. When everyone around her seems to be stifling her dreams, she takes matters into her own hands and gets violent to live a free life. In 1918, in a farmhouse in rural Texas, Pearl admires her reflection in the mirror as she dances while wearing one of her mother's old dresses. All of a sudden, Pearl's mother, Ruth, walks in and admonishes her in German for wearing her old things and tells her to take them off. She then tells her daughter to feed the animals in the barn. In the barn, Pearl tells Charlie the cow and Mary the sheep how farm life isn't for her because she's special and the whole world will know her name. She twirls around the pitchfork theatrically and climbs a tower of hay bales. Seconds later, a goose enters the barn, and Pearl approaches it while holding the pitchfork. Unconsciously, she raises the pitchfork above the animal and stabs it. Later, Pearl walks over to the edge of the pier in the pond and calls over Theda, the alligator. Soon, the reptile swims toward the pier, and she offers the dead goose skewered on the pitchfork. Theda jumps out of the murky water and snaps the bird in its jaws. That evening, while preparing dinner, Ruth tells her daughter that her dancing dreams are selfish. She then tells her daughter to fetch her father. As Pearl leaves, she sees a newspaper and mentions that the Allies have taken control of France, and the war might soon be over. Ruth dismisses her words and wishes for no talk of war at the table tonight. Shortly after, Pearl pushes her father's wheelchair into the dining room. Her father is infirm, unable to speak, and can no longer care for himself. At the table, Ruth tells her daughter to help her father eat. Later that night, Pearl reads her husband Howard's letters to her as he's been away at war. Missing her husband, she imagines seeing Howard walking up the driveway wearing his uniform. Afterward, Pearl gives her father his medication and says she'll be going to town tomorrow to pick up some more. She says she plans to stop by the theater to watch a picture. She then gets into the tub and tells her father how all the best dancers get shown in the pictures and wishes she could be one of them someday. Abruptly, Ruth walks into the bathroom and says the money for the medication is on the table. She reminds her daughter to cover her face while in town because of the resurgence of influenza cases. The next day, Pearl rides her bike to the pharmacy for a refill of her father's syrup. She then goes to the theater to watch Palace Follies. She takes a swig from the medicine bottle before enjoying the images of the dancing women on screen. After the movie, Pearl reads the program in the alleyway beside the theater, where she meets a man who offers her a smoke and tells her she'd make it as a dancer if she wanted to. The man offers to let her sneak backstage to watch the next movie because he's the projectionist, but she declines and has to head home soon. The projectionist tells her to wait for him outside, while he heads back inside the theater. When he returns, he hands her one frame from the Palace Follies film reel as a souvenir. On the bike ride home, the film frame gets caught in a gust of wind and Pearl chases it into a cornfield. She finds a clearing with a scarecrow wearing a top hat. She takes the scarecrow down, puts the top hat on, and waltzes around with it. After the dance, she kisses the scarecrow passionately but immediately drops it when she sees it turn into the projectionist. Shocked, she defensively screams at the scarecrow that she's married. Seconds later, she straddles the scarecrow and pleasures herself. Outside the house, Ruth tells Pearl to leave the top hat on the porch and to wash up so she doesn't bring any germs into their home. In the bathroom, Pearl shares what she saw in the theater earlier with her father. After a few seconds, she pinches his finger and waits for a reaction. With no reaction from her father, she prods his face and asks if he's still in there before squeezing his neck. At dinner, Ruth asks Pearl where the rest of the money is. She lies and says she used it to buy candy. Ruth slides her daughter's plate away, says the candy was her supper, and reminds her not to be careless with money. She then tells her daughter to leave the table. In her bedroom, next to a framed picture of Howard on a table, Pearl prays to become the biggest star the world has ever known so she can be as far away from this place as possible. Outside the window, a shooting star flies by. The next day in the barn, Pearl sees her affluent mother-in-law and sister-in-law, Mitzi, arrive. Mitzi heads over to the barn, and Pearl compliments her dress. Mitzi asks if she's received any newsletters from Howard, and Pearl shakes her head. Their family knew a doctor that could have signed off that Howard was medically ineligible for the war, but he still went despite their father. Meanwhile, on the porch, Ruth declines the roast pig Pearl's mother-in-law brought and says they don't accept charity, so her mother-in-law leaves the food on the porch. At the barn, Mitzi shares information about a dance audition for a traveling chorus line at the church. Mitzi wants them to go to the audition together and tells her friend it'll be at 11 a.m. on Saturday. When Mitzi and her mother-in-law leave, Pearl excitedly plants a kiss on Charlie's nose and believes this could be her big break. In the bunkhouse, Pearl takes the top hat and program from underneath the bed and imagines herself on stage. In the house, Pearl takes a dress from Ruth's closet and sneaks into her room, hiding from her mother. She puts on the dress and top hat in front of the mirror. That night, Pearl sneaks out the window and rides her bike to the movie theater. She knocks on the side door and the projectionist lets her in. In the projection room, Pearl tells him about the dance audition, and he encourages her to believe in herself and do it. He then asks her what film she'd like to see, and she says Palace Follies. He says she's already seen that and asks if she wants to see a film he brought over from France. The projector whirs and he tells her to watch through a small window. The young woman curiously watches an adult film featuring a man and two women making love. The projectionist says stag films will revolutionize the film industry, and he plans on capitalizing on it. Later, the two sit on the couch, where the man tells her she should make the most of her life because she might not get a second chance. He shares his plans of moving to Europe after the pandemic. She says she'd like to do that if only her parents could just die. The man is taken aback by her words, but she waves it off and tells him how nice it is to talk to someone, especially since she worries she might not be the same as other people. Afterward, she thanks the man for seeing her tonight before she leaves. At home, Pearl sneaks into the house and she hears noises coming from another room. She walks down the hall and sees her mother sobbing on her bed. The young woman returns to her bedroom, lies in bed, and stares at Howard's photo. The following day, Pearl pushes her father's wheelchair out of the house, and Ruth sees them leave. At the pond, Pearl pushes the wheelchair close to the pier's edge and beckons Theda. She tells her father she'll be leaving soon and it'll be easier for her if she won't feel like she's abandoning him. Suddenly, Ruth asks her what she's doing and says her father needs to get back in the house. The daughter asks her mother why she hates her, and Ruth says she only wants what's best. Pearl asks when she'll get what she wants, and her mother says she'll understand that making the most of what you have is what's important, before wheeling her husband back to the house. Later, Pearl sees Theda swimming away by the edge of the pond, where she finds the alligator's nest and takes one egg. In the barn, Pearl imagines Howard exploding while walking toward the house as she crushes the alligator egg. At dinner, Ruth shows her daughter the Palace Follies program and tells her to isolate in the bunkhouse. Her daughter says there's an audition tomorrow she'd like to go to, but Ruth forbids her. Ruth calls her ungrateful and says she knows Pearl keeps her true, malevolent self hidden, but people will notice and be frightened of her just as she is. Frustrated, Ruth says her daughter is unwell, and it's only a matter of time before she hurts someone and she will never let her leave the farm. The young woman says she can't be stopped from leaving, angering her mother, who expresses her deep regret for living a life taking care of her catatonic husband. Suddenly, Ruth picks up a knife and offers it to her because their deaths are what she desires. Ruth places the blade against her husband's throat and tells her daughter that she should do it to better suit her dreams. She asks why she should be saddled with caring for her husband and the farm and not get what she wants before stabbing the table. Ruth tells her to leave if that's what she wants, but if she fails, she wants Pearl to remember what it feels like because that's what she feels whenever she looks at her. Pearl meekly answers that all she wants is to not end up like her mother. Upset by her child's words, Ruth approaches her slowly, then slaps her across the face, and the two women get into a physical altercation. Suddenly, Pearl pushes her mother to the hearth. Ruth's skirt catches on fire and soon she's engulfed in flames and drops to the floor. Her daughter puts the fire out by throwing a pot of water at her mother. Ruth moans in agony on the floor, covered in third-degree burns. All her husband can do is watch helplessly. Moments later, Pearl drags her mother down the cellar stairs. She returns to the dining room and sees the fear in her father's eyes. Later, Pearl heads to the theater and has a rendezvous with the projectionist. The young woman dreams of curtsying in front of an audience who toss flowers on the stage. Howard, her father, and Ruth applaud her, but as Ruth removes her mask, she reveals a badly burnt face. Suddenly, Pearl wakes up from the nightmare next to the projectionist. She gets up from bed, puts on her clothes, and tells him she must practice for the audition. He gives her top hat back and pulls her in for a kiss. Later, the projectionist drives Pearl home, and she sees a soldier walking by the road, wondering if it might be Howard. At the house, Pearl tells the man to stay outside for a moment. Inside, she finds her father still in the dining room and apologizes for leaving him. She places her ear next to the cellar door and listens for any noise. Then she wheels her father to his room and gives him his syrup. Outside, the projectionist sees the rotting pig on the porch. Then Pearl tells him to come inside. She introduces the man to her father and says they should go to her bedroom. In her bedroom, the two kiss on the bed, and the woman says she wants to leave the farm forever, but the man thinks it's not so bad. Suddenly, they hear a noise downstairs, but Pearl chooses to ignore it. The man pushes her off him and thinks they need to check what it is in case it's her father. Downstairs, the projectionist sees the mess in the kitchen, and Pearl startles him when she taps his shoulder. She lies, says their dog made the mess and that she placed it in the cellar. Then she takes him to the barn, where she introduces him to the animals. He asks her dog's name, and she forgets her lie and says they don't have one. Weirded out by Pearl, the projectionist says he needs to go back to work and kisses her cheek. She asks him if she did anything wrong that caused him to become cold toward her, but he insists she did nothing wrong. She thinks he's lying and won't take her with him to Europe and angrily presses him for an answer. The projectionist admits that she scares him and wishes her luck on the audition before leaving. As he leaves, Pearl grabs the pitchfork while the man walks back to his car. The man overlooks the angered lady behind him, who screams that she's not staying on the farm and stabs him in the chest with the pitchfork. The car rolls away and Pearl follows it, pulls the man to the ground and impales him through the mouth. Later, she opens the cellar door, sees Ruth at the top of the stairs and pushes her down the steps. In the bathroom, she cleans up her father and wishes he wouldn't look at her so fearfully. Soon after, Pearl wears her mother's red dress and carries a suitcase. She stops by her father's room and flaunts her dress as a tear rolls down his cheek. She thanks him for everything and kisses him before smothering him with a pillowcase. Minutes later, Pearl pushes the projectionist car to the pond and Theta swims toward it. At the church, Pearl waits for her turn beside a nervous Mitzi. Mitzi asks her why she's not scared, and Pearl answers that she's just used to the feeling. When it's Pearl's turn to audition, she signals to the piano player that she's ready and begins her routine. Suddenly, the curtains behind her open, and she's joined by other dancers on stage as they perform in front of a battlefield. Near the end of the routine, fireworks light up the sky as she holds a triumphant pose. After the performance, the panel thanks Pearl for auditioning but rejects her. She asks them for a reason, and they tell her they're looking for someone younger and blonde. Tears fall from Pearl's eyes as she imagines the projectionist, Howard, and her parents on the panel. She begs them for another chance and screams that she's a star. Moments later, Mitzi finds Pearl bawling outside the church and offers to take her home. On the porch, Mitzi sees the rotting roast pig. Pearl sits at the dining table and Mitzi joins her, consoling her sister-in-law. Pearl confides that there may be something wrong with her, so Mitzi offers to pretend she's Howard and allows her friend to let out everything she's bottled up inside. Pearl goes on a lengthy confession starting with her resentment for Howard's aversion to his privilege, and how he never took her away from her miserable life even if he knew how much she hated it. She fantasizes about other men and having an affair with the projectionist. She admits to feeling relief when she miscarried Howard's child because she never wanted to be a mother. She divulges the satisfaction she gets when harming living beings. She started with animals because they had no feelings, but taking her mother's and the projectionist's lives made her feel good. She feels guilty for smothering her father because she thinks he didn't deserve it. The saddened woman believes that the only thing she can do now is to make things right before Howard returns. Mitzi is stunned by Pearl's confessions and stands up to leave. Pearl says she's happy for her getting the part, and Mitzi lies, saying she didn't. Pearl wishes Mitzi wouldn't lie to her, so she finally admits being excited to dance around the state. Afterward, Pearl asks if Mitzi will tell anyone what she did, and Mitzi promises she won't. Seconds later, Mitzi exits the front door and walks away from the house. She sees Pearl grab an axe, so she runs, screaming for help. Mitzi trips and Pearl catches up to her and hacks her back several times until Mitzi falls to the ground. Mitzi says she'll do anything she wants, but Pearl says it's not about what she wants anymore, but about making the most of what she has. In the cellar, Pearl lies in her dead mother's arms. Later, she dismembers Mitzi's body and feeds the parts to Theta. Shortly after, Pearl sets the table in the dining room and props up her parents' corpses around it. Days later, Howard returns from war and enters the house. He's horrified at the sight in the dining room and sees his wife in the corner. She tells him how happy she is that he's home and gives him a lingering, pained smile.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.